Now we start with Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Coleridge is a great poet of Romantic age. He was born in 1772 and died in 1834. He was a great poet of uh, Romantic age, and chief poetical works of Samuel Taylor Coleridge consist of his volumes of poems. One is personal poems, political poems, and romantic poems. So Coleridge produced these volumes of poems, and his romantic poems contain great poems of this age, and we can say great poems of English literature. Then we see Coleridge as a poet. Wordsworth and Coleridge jointly brought out the lyrical ballads in 1798. With this year, we know that Romantic age started, and Romantic poetry started with the publication of lyrical ballads in 1798. So there existed two powerful tendencies in the literature of the time, says Jordan. Each of which was liable to excess when it operated alone. Each of which needed to work in harmony with the other and to take into itself something from the other. The tendency to realism seen in such a poem as Crape's The Village. Once Coleridge commented on lyrical ballads and wrote, the thought suggested itself that a series of poems might be composed of two sorts. In the one, the incidents and agents were to be, in part at least, supernatural, and the excellence aimed at was to consist in the interesting of the affections by the dramatic truth of such emotions as would not naturally accompany such situations, supposing them real. And exclusion of detailed descriptions also enables him to keep the reality of the supernatural phenomenon tantalizingly vague and indeterminate. And there are many elements that can be discussed in his poems. So his poems include supernaturalism. Three major works of Coleridge, that are The Ancient Mariner, Kubla Khan, and Christabel. And all these poems deal with supernatural phenomena. As a poet of supernatural, Coleridge strictly eschewed crudeness from his writings. Writers like Horace Walpole and Monk Lewis reveled in cheap thrills. Their writings could excite one's senses to a feverish pitch, they were too but they were too remote from human reality to touch the tender chords capable of producing still, sad music of humanity. Coleridge replaced crudeness with suggestiveness. He did not portray horror, he suggested it. Both in the cases of the nightmare, life in death, and the serpent woman, Geraldine, he resists the temptation of depicting their hideous monstrosity. He conveys the gruesomeness of life in death, and then we see that elements of mystery Coleridge included in his poems. Coleridge possesses an unusual gift of evoking the mystery of things. He has an eye for subtleties that could give an uncanny look even to what is just commonplace. The ancient mariner is made a mysterious character just by the mention of his glittering eye, long grey beard, and skinny hand. Geraldine looks mysterious because of the circumstances in which she makes her appearance. Her being beautiful exceedingly, also contributes to her mysteriousness. But Coleridge uses this faculty most effectively while making the ordinary natural phenomena like the rising of the sun and the moon, the blowing of the winds, and the twinkling of stars assume a mysterious character. Mast high eyes sending a dismal scene and making cracking and growling sound is bound to appear mysterious. And we also find a fertile imagination in his poems. Coleridge is said to have the most vigorous imagination among all the romantic poets. But for this well developed faculty of his, he would not have been able to create his perplexing mysteries. In the exercise of his consciousness to describe things not seen personally by him, but Coleridge's imagination was bold enough to seize upon suitable facts from his reading, which was vast and varied, and portray them as vividly as if they had been literally present before his eyes. And one of the most important element in his poems is dreamlike quality. Coleridge gave his poems dreamlike quality as one sees a dream when one goes through his poems. The major poems of Coleridge have a strange dreamlike atmosphere about them. Dreams with him are no shadows; they are the very substance of his life. He fed on his dreams and vitalized them in his poems. Kubla Khan is essentially a dream poem, recounting in a poetic form what he saw in a vision. The ancient mariner comes from Cruikshank's dream and displays a dreamlike movement. C.M. Bovra, in the romantic imagination, illustrates the affinity of the ancient mariner with the dream. On the surface, it shows many qualities of a dream, says Bovra. It moves in abrupt stages, each of which has its own single dominating character. Its visual impressions are remarkably brilliant and absorbing. And we also see some influence of medievalism in his poems. Coleridge's love of the supernatural led him to an exploration of the Middle Ages, and he was fascinated by the romances and legends associated with them. Then, people were superstitious and they believed in the supernatural. Coleridge found in their life plenty to draw upon and write about. The ancient mariner, Christabel, Kubla Khan, and that brief but exquisite ballad Love all are wrought with the glamour of the Middle Ages. But it should be clear that medievalism does not form the substance of his poems. It gives them the much needed sense of remoteness and offers a fit setting for the marvelous, which is called its purpose to hint at or openly display. Even in Christabel, where we have a medieval castle as the scene of action, the allusions to chivalry, tourneys, and combats are not very precise. Then, love of nature is also a dominant feature of his poems. Coleridge shows for nature the same loving devotion as we find in Wordsworth. But Bora rightly points out that his eye for nature is for its more subtle charms and less obvious appeals, and he takes richer and more luxurious pleasure in those aspects of nature that can present a dramatic and mysterious look. He can evoke the richness of color as well as the magical associations of sound much better than any other poet. And he is equally successful both in giving graphic descriptions and in achieving broad, generalized effects. In his early poems, under the influence of Wordsworth, he takes a pantheistic view of nature and also accepts it as a moral teacher. But later he comes to believe that it is we who invest nature with life and it simply reflects our own moods. And we also find meditative note in his poems. Coleridge was gifted with a reflective and speculative temper. The philosophic bent of mind displayed by Wordsworth in his poetry was also induced by Coleridge. Even as a child, he showed marked propensity for serious reading. He read Plotinus when he was at Christ Hospital, and when he grew up, he read other philosophers also. The 18th century philosophers Locke and Hobbes did not impress him, but he showed a great regard for the German transcendentalists Kant and Schiller. Charles Lamb thought of him as a logician and metaphysician. Then, humanitarianism. Dodden finds the humanity in Coleridge's poetry. Both he and Wordsworth supported the French Revolution in the hope that it would emancipate the masses from the tyranny of the despotic lords. But they were miserably disappointed by the revolution when Coleridge discovered that the revolutionists were perverting or violating the very principles they had stood for. Now we see the narrative skills of Coleridge. Coleridge is superb in the art of storytelling. He knows how to create suspense or to evoke interest in the narrative. In The Ancient Mariner, he invests the mariner with a hypnotic power in order to rouse our curiosity in his story. And he introduces his events when dramatically by bringing the spectre ship gradually close to view. A hush of expectancy is created before death, and life and death are dramatically brought on the scene to determine the fate of the mariner. 200 sailors uh, cursing the mariner and dropping down dead one by one, with their soul passing by him like the whiz of his crossbow, also produce a very dramatic effect. Wedding guest interruptions are used to highlight the climatic moments. All these devices give the poem an incomparable narrative beauty. Christabel and Love also displays the same witchery of narration. The various characteristics of Coleridge's poetry discussed above distinguish him as the most complete representative of the English Romantic poetry of the early 19th century.